"Excuse me, sir. We maintain certain standards here." Victoria Sterling's voice sliced through the polished marble air of the Grandview Imperial lobby. Her eyes swept over the man in front of her. Dark skin, simple black t-shirt, worn jeans, a soft leather jacket. The chandelier's crystal light caught on her disgust. "You don't have a reservation, do you?" she added, lips curled, already signaling security with a practiced flick of her fingers. Around them, wealthy guests paused their conversations. A woman in pearls leaned closer, whispering. How did he even get past the door? Two white security guards approached. No questions, no checks, just obedience to her signal. Damon stood still, not pleading, not retreating, just watching. As they reached for his arm, Victoria smirked. Perhaps try the Holiday Inn down the road. Laughter. A few phones rose silently. Snapshots of shame. Damon didn't say a word. His gaze drifted, not at Victoria, but past her, to the guests who turned their heads, to the staff who looked down but said nothing. The guards flanked him now, hands hovering near his shoulders like he was dangerous. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He simply walked, each step echoing louder than any protest. Victoria followed, heels clicking triumphantly behind him. "This is exactly why we have protocols," she declared to no one and everyone, loud enough to carry. Some people think they can just walk in anywhere. The lobby watched in silence, some amused, some uneasy, no one brave. Damon reached the revolving door. He paused, turned back. His voice was low but clear. "I hope you all remember this moment." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Is that a threat?" Damon's stare didn't flinch. "It's a promise." And with that, the door spun. But what none of them knew, what Victoria would learn too late, was that the man they'd just humiliated now owned the building they were standing in. Damon Washington didn't take a limo. He didn't wear a tailored suit or bring an entourage. He stepped out of a regular rideshare, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, blending in like any tired traveler arriving late at night. The truth was his Tesla sat untouched at the private airport hangar just outside the city. He didn't want anyone recognizing the vehicle. Not tonight, not for what he came here to do. His jeans, soft from years of wear, paired with a plain black t-shirt and a scuffed leather jacket, told no one his net worth or the empire he built. And that was intentional. He had learned long ago that the world speaks differently to you when it thinks you're no one. That difference was what he came to expose. Damon had just finalized the acquisition of a hospitality group, one that quietly included the Grandview Imperial. Only a handful of people knew. Victoria Sterling wasn't one of them. Just 48 hours ago, Damon's team had signed the final transfer papers through a complex web of intermediary firms. The purchase was quiet, intentional, and complete. Washington Hospitality Group now owned this entire luxury chain, from beachfront resorts in Maui to urban towers like the Grandview Imperial. Damon didn't need headlines. He needed truth, not from PR reports or polished metrics, but from the mouths of gatekeepers like Victoria. Whispers had reached him over the past year. Complaint from minority guests dismissed. Staff turnover disproportionately high among non-white employees. Patterns too familiar to ignore. So tonight, Damon walked in as a ghost in his own house. Not to be seen, but to watch. His identity cloaked in anonymity. He would see exactly how this hotel treated people it didn't consider valuable. Not investors, not partners. Just another man walking in from the cold, asking for a place to stay, and being told, with a smile, that he didn't belong. Victoria Sterling had run the Grandview Imperial for 12 years. To many, she was a picture of elegance and efficiency. Always poised, always composed. But beneath that polished exterior lived a deep commitment to one unspoken rule: exclusivity at all costs. To her, luxury wasn't just about marble floors and concierge service. It was about control. Control over who entered, who stayed, who was made to feel worthy. Her version of luxury had a look, a tone, a pedigree. And Damon, in his worn jeans and unassuming confidence, violated all of it. Ryan Shun, her assistant manager, stood nearby as Damon approached the front desk. Young, sharp, and still learning where his voice belonged. Ryan had seen Victoria turn people away before, but something about this man felt different. The way he stood, the quiet authority. There was something unshakable about Damon, even before anyone knew his name. "Good evening," Damon said, voice steady, eyes kind. "I have a reservation under Washington Group." Victoria didn't even glance at the computer. Her eyes flicked over his clothes again, then settled into a dismissive smirk. "I'm afraid you've made a mistake. This establishment requires a certain level of clientele," she said, dragging out the last word like a warning. The sentence floated in the air, heavy with meaning. Around them, conversation slowed. A nearby couple paused mid-check-in. One man subtly turned his phone camera toward the desk. Damon remained composed. "If you could check the system, you'll find it under Washington Hospitality." His tone never faltered. Victoria crossed her arms, leaning just slightly forward. "Sir, you can save us both some time. We've had people like you try to walk in before. You're not the first to pretend you belong." Damon blinked once, not in surprise, but in memory. He'd heard those words before. Different city, different voice. Same message. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. Instead, Damon reached into his wallet and calmly produced a sleek black card. The Centurion, the kind issued by invitation only. No spending limit. No questions asked. "Perhaps this will help verify my identity," he said quietly, placing it gently on the counter. Ryan leaned forward instinctively, eyes widening. Victoria barely looked. "Fake cards are easy to make these days," she scoffed. "You think we don't see this?" She motioned to security with a subtle gesture, her performance now fully underway. Damon exhaled slowly, his military training kicking in, not for danger, but for restraint, for the art of being underestimated and using it like a weapon. He noticed every glance, every whisper, every glance of curiosity that quickly shifted to discomfort. He wasn't just being denied, he was being erased, and everyone watching was complicit in that erasure. But Damon wasn't here to win a moment. He came to change the game. As the security officers approached, two tall men, crisp uniforms, calm but firm. Damon turned slightly, offering no resistance. "Gentlemen," he said, voice calm as stone. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm a guest here." One of them, Jake Morrison, hesitated. Something about Damon didn't fit the usual pattern. Too still, too composed. But Victoria was already in full performance. "He's trespassing," she declared loudly, ensuring the entire lobby heard. "Remove him immediately." As Damon was flanked and guided toward the door, Victoria followed a few paces behind, narrating the moment like a grand hostess defending her castle. "We have policies for a reason," she said aloud. "Standards, protocols." Her voice was crisp, rehearsed. Around them, some guests nodded in agreement. Others avoided eye contact. And in that hush, just before the doors turned, Damon paused, looked back at the people who washed but said nothing. "Remember this moment," he said quietly. "Remember what you did or didn't do." Then he stepped into the night. Damon stood on the sidewalk just beyond the hotel's golden glow. Behind him, the marble lobby still shimmered like a cathedral to wealth, its chandeliers raining down light on a lie. His pulse remained steady, but inside, something deeper stirred. Not rage, not even pain anymore, but clarity. The kind that came from watching an entire system reveal itself in a single moment. He pulled out his phone, thumbs gliding swiftly over the screen. The message to Sarah was brief. "Execute Grandview announcement. Full staff meeting in 20. Terminate VS effective tonight." The response came seconds later. On it, Damon exhaled. He wasn't here to make a scene. He was here to clean house. He stared back through the glass doors, watching Victoria rejoin her cluster of guests, basking in self-importance. She had no idea her performance was already broadcasting beyond these walls, carried now by the very system she thought she controlled. Inside, Victoria's voice rose above the low hum of luxury, regaling guests with her version of events. "You develop a sixth sense in this business," she said, sipping from a crystal glass. I could tell instantly. Something was off. He didn't belong. Laughter rippled around her, shallow and polite. Ryan Shun stood behind the front desk, staring down at the screen in front of him. The reservation was there. Washington Hospitality Group. Confirmed. A note attached. VIPCO's site visit. Discreet. No public acknowledgement. His stomach tightened. The weight of realization settling in fast. Victoria hadn't just turned away a guest. She'd humiliated the new owner. And now Ryan was frozen between conscience and chain of command. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. Victoria was still speaking. "We can't risk our brand on people who don't understand this level of service," she said smoothly. "Presentation matters." And with that, she smiled like she'd just saved the kingdom. 20 minutes had passed. Not long enough for the lobby to forget, but just enough for the tension to settle into background noise. That's when the front doors opened again. Damon stepped back inside, not escorted this time, not questioned, not stopped. The same man, same clothes, same steady walk. But now he carried gravity. Phones began to buzz. A tech entrepreneur in the corner glanced down at a headline and dropped his drink. He elbowed his companion, whispering furiously. Ryan looked up just in time to meet Damon's eyes, and a breath caught in his chest. He scrambled to check the reservation again, then turned to face him fully. "Mr. Washington," he stammered. "Yes, sir. The penthouse suite is ready." I tried to tell her. Damon gave a single nod, his expression unreadable. Around them, whispers multiplied, glances sharpened. Recognition was setting in, not just of who Damon was, but of what had just occurred. Victoria didn't notice the shift right away. She was still holding court, still delivering her speech about standards and reputation, until she heard the silence ripple like a wave. She turned slowly, scanning the lobby, then froze. Her eyes landed on Damon, standing calmly at the reception desk, his presence now undeniable. "What is he doing here?" she barked, stepping forward. "Jake, where's security?" But Jake Morrison was no longer moving on her cue. He stood by the pillar, eyes locked on his phone, face pale. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "corporate just called." "I don't care who called." Victoria snapped. "Remove him again." But Jake didn't budge. Damon turned toward her now, his voice even and unhurried. "I believe you were interrupted earlier." He pulled a card from his jacket, holding it out. "Damon Washington." "Say." Victoria stared at it, lips parting. The color drained from her face as the room tilted beneath her. "No," Victoria whispered, shaking her head slowly, the words catching in her throat. This is a joke." But Ryan's computer screen betrayed her. The reservation was there, the attached memo, the press alert lighting up his inbox. And now, guests were pulling out their phones, not to record humiliation, but to capture history. Damon stood still, letting the truth settle like dust after a collapse. "Would you prefer further verification?" he asked calmly, already dialing. The lobby's hush was broken only by the click of a call connecting. On speaker, a composed voice filled the space. "Mr. Washington, welcome. We're honored to have you on site. Your acquisition of the chain is now public." Victoria's Wath. Around her, the guests she once rallied began to distance themselves, eyes wide, silent. Her gaze jumped from face to face, looking for support, finding none. And for the first time all evening, the room belonged to someone else. Damon took a slow step toward Victoria, not aggressive, just steady. He raised his phone again, this time to reveal a live conference call. "I thought it might be helpful if you spoke directly with your board," he said evenly. "They've been curious about how you handle guest relations." Voices buzzed on the other end, confused and alarmed. Victoria's hand reached instinctively for the counter, her balance gone. This can't be happening," she murmured. "I was just protecting the hotel." Damon tilted his head slightly. "From what, Victoria?" "From people who look like me." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. And then, across the marble floor, came the soft sound of someone clapping. It was a young black woman in the corner, the one who had watched the humiliation unfold earlier. Her eyes met Damon's, full of quiet fire. Others joined her, not in celebration, but in recognition. The reckoning had begun. Outside, the night air pressed cool against Damon's skin, but the fire in his chest didn't flicker. He stood beneath the hotel's ornate awning, watching luxury swirl inside its glass doors. Comfort built on exclusion. His phone buzzed. Sarah's updates poured in. Press outlets had received the acquisition release. Business wires were lighting up, and social media was already stirring. The footage from inside, the rejection, the silence, the looks, was being clipped, posted, dissected. He hadn't intended to go viral. He intended to go deep. Systemic rut didn't reveal itself in statements. It revealed itself in scenes like the one he'd just endured. And now that the curtain had been pulled back, Damon was done playing quiet. He tapped another contact, Jennifer Martinez, head of HR. "Pull every personnel file at Grandview Imperial," he said. "I want patterns, complaints, settlements, turnover, anything that proves this wasn't a one-time incident." Jennifer didn't ask questions. She knew his tone. Through the glass, Damon could still see the lobby, still hear faint echoes of Victoria's voice, the remnants of her public performance. She was oblivious to the tremor she had just triggered. Jake Morrison stood stiffly by the entryway, radio crackling in his ear. His instinct screamed that something had shifted, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure who he was protecting anymore. Back inside, Ryan Sean hovered behind the desk, fingers frozen over the keyboard. The news alerts were multiplying by the minute. Washington Group acquires Metropolitan Hotels in $4.2 billion deal. One alert had Damon's face beneath the headline, the same face Victoria had scoffed at minutes earlier. Ryan swallowed hard. He hadn't stopped the train wreck, but he wasn't about to pretend he hadn't seen it coming. He pulled up internal logs, guest complaints, staff files, and there was a record of racial bias incidents, a disturbing pattern. The truth was already in the system. Damon's phone buzzed again. Jennifer calling back fast. "Sir, I pulled her file. 17 formal complaints over the past 18 months, all from minority guests or employees. 6 of them settled quietly through NDAs. HR at the old parent company buried the rest." Damon closed his eyes for a moment. It was worse than he'd expected, but not surprising. "Get ready to make it public," he said. "We'll waive the NDAs. They deserve to speak." A pause. "Yes, sir." He hung up, then stood still, absorbing the moment, not as a man who'd just been disrespected, but as a leader witnessing a pattern repeated across decades. The lobby's grandeur was just a shell, a polished front over rotted wood, and Victoria had been its architect. She hadn't just upheld the system, she had perfected it. Damon turned back toward the glass doors. There was still something he needed to do. One more guest had just walked in, and Victoria was about to do it again. The lobby doors parted again, and Damon stepped inside for the second time that evening. This time, not as a guest testing boundaries, but as a man about to redraw them entirely. Phones buzzed louder now. One guest gasped audibly. The tech entrepreneur who had recognized him earlier was recording openly, whispering, "This is going to be everywhere." But Victoria didn't turn. Not yet. She was too busy analyzing the next arrival, a young black man, casual clothes, calm demeanor. Damon watched as she tilted her head, eyes narrowing in that same familiar scan. Her voice floated out across the floor. "Sir, do you have a reservation?" It was happening again like clockwork. Damon didn't interrupt. Not immediately. He waited until her posture shifted into that unmistakable shape, polite condescension sharpened by authority. Then he moved forward, past the guests still frozen in their chairs, past the ones who now knew who he was. His presence alone bent the air, and this time Victoria noticed. She turned slowly, her voice trailing mid-sentence. Her eyes locked onto Damon, back again, unmoved, unwavering, and her lips parted in stunned silence. The color in her cheeks drained so quickly it was almost audible. "You," she breathed. "You're not supposed to be here." Damon didn't blink. "Own here." That simple sentence split the room in half. Some guests flinched. Others leaned forward, transfixed. Victoria staggered back a step, bumping into the check-in counter. Her gaze darted toward Jake Morrison, who now stood motionless, his earpiece forgotten. "Jake," she said, voice cracking. He's lying." But Jake didn't move. Instead, he pulled up his own phone and turned the screen toward her. There was the press release, Damon's name, the corporate confirmation. She reached out, fingers trembling, but the headline didn't change. The truth was immutable. The humiliation she had engineered was now a mirror, and she was finally being forced to look. Damon walked forward, slow and deliberate, until he stood directly in front of her. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder. Black, clean, heavy with consequence. "Victoria," he said evenly, "you made a lot of assumptions tonight. About my clothes, my skin, my worth. But the most dangerous one was assuming there wouldn't be consequences." He opened a folder slowly, revealing documents that bore her name. Termination papers, a printed list of every complaint, her own signature on sealed settlements. Her knees nearly gave out. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "This is entrapment." "I didn't know." "That's the point," Damon replied. He never cared to know. Around them, phones were raised again, but not in mockery. This time, the footage would mark a turning point. The reckoning was no longer hypothetical. It was happening right there on polished marble floors, in front of chandeliers, among guests who now knew too much to stay quiet. The lobby held its breath. Damon didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word he spoke carried weight, not because of volume, but because the silence around him begged to be filled. "I've spent years studying moments like this," he said calmly, still facing Victoria. "How power acts when it thinks it's invisible. How people perform when they believe no one is watching." He turned to face the guests now, some shifting in their seats, some still frozen, phones hovering midair. "Tonight wasn't just about me. It was about all of you. Every person who watched, who nodded, who said nothing." His gaze swept across the room. Not angry, not even accusatory, just painfully clear. This is what systemic bias looks like. It doesn't yell. It whispers in policies, in smirks, in silence. Behind the desk, Ryan chin lowered his head. He wasn't a villain, but he hadn't spoken either. And now, that silence weighed just as much. Victoria's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, as if it might anchor her to a reality quickly slipping away. Damon didn't look at her anymore. He was speaking to the board now, his phone still on speaker, the conference call still active. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the corporate voices listening in, "you entrusted this property to someone who believes exclusion is a service. That cruelty, when polished, becomes professionalism." On the other end, a few muffled voices murmured. One cleared their throat. Damon held up a page from the folder, her personnel file, thick with red flags. 17 documented incidents, 6 settlements. None of it stopped her, because she thought no one important would ever be on the receiving end. He turned his eyes back to Victoria. Until now, a murmur rippled through the lobby. Not shock, recognition. They'd all seen this before, just never with this much light on it. Victoria's voice finally returned, small, shaky, desperate. I was just doing my job," she stammered. "We have standards, protocols. I didn't mean." Damon raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "Be very careful what you say next. You're being recorded by security, by phones, and by your board." The room stilled again. Every eye locked on her, not with sympathy, but with calculation. Her excuses had no oxygen left. Damon took a step back, giving her space to fall on her own. "Tell them, Victoria. Tell the board how you decide who belongs. Explain your process. Share your insight." He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. But each word felt like judgment being passed in real time. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no version of this story that made her look like anything other than exactly who she was. And suddenly, the woman who had orchestrated his humiliation now stood trapped in a spotlight of her own making. Jake Morrison stepped forward, hesitation still clinging to his shoulders. "Sir," he said softly, "should I begin documenting tonight's incident for legal purposes?" Damon turned to him, nodding once. "Yes. Start with what you witnessed. Include every word she said, every action she took." Jake gave a firm nod. No longer a guard following orders, but a man choosing the right side. At the edge of the lobby, The young black couple who had watched everything stepped closer. The woman held up her phone, voice steady. "Sir, I posted the video. It's already spreading. People are using #HotelJustice. You need to know, you're not alone." Damon nodded deeply, not as a CEO, but as someone who understood exactly what those words cost to say aloud. "Thank you," he said, "for not staying silent." And just like that, the balance shifted. The crowd was no longer passive. They were watching for something else now. Not spectacle, but justice. Damon lifted the phone again, dialing with the same unshakable calm that had defined his every move. "Jennifer," he said when the call connected. "Proceed with termination. Effective immediately. Cause: discrimination, breach of policy, reputational harm." Her voice came through the speaker crisp and sure. "Understood, sir. I've already reviewed her file. We have a legal ground. All documentation is in order." The finality of it echoed across the marble lobby like a gavel. "Victoria Stagger Buckworth, Malfagape. You can't do this. You planned it. You baited me." Damon tilted his head slightly. "No, I gave you the opportunity to act with decency. What you did was entirely your choice." Phones filmed. Eyewitnesses stood silent. And Victoria, once the self-appointed guardian of elegance, now became a symbol of exactly what Damon had come to destroy. The reckoning was no longer personal. It was policy, and the first domino had officially fallen. The news was moving faster than the air conditioning. Reporters were already outside. Sarah texted. TMZ offered $50,000 for exclusive footage. CNN just picked it up. Legal teams from 3 civil rights orgs reached out, want to support any victims. Damon let the messages scroll past his vision. It wasn't about press. It was about precedent. Ryan Shun cleared his throat behind a desk. "Sir," he said nervously, "what happened to the rest of us?" We saw it happen," but Damon turned to him. "Ryan, I saw you hesitate. That matters. But moving forward, silence won't be enough." Ryan nodded slowly, understanding. Redemption wasn't free. It had to be earned. Jake Morrison's voice cut in from his radio. "Sir, parking lots filling with press fans." Damon didn't blink. "Let them in." He turned back to the guests, his voice steady. "If anyone's still filming, good. This is what accountability looks like. And it's just getting started." Victoria's breath came in shallow bursts, hands trembling as she clung to a crumbling narrative. "I gave my life to this place," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. 15 years, Damon didn't flinch. And in 15 years, how many voices did you silence? How many faces did you turn away because they didn't fit your vision of wealth? He pulled one last document from the folder, sealed settlement summaries, her signature in each. "We now own those NDAs. The victims can finally speak freely." Her eyes widened in panic. The crowd inhaled, and with one final gaze, measured, unflinching, Damon looked her in the eye. "You didn't lose your job tonight because of one mistake. You lost it because tonight the curtain was pulled back, and everyone saw who you've been all along." Victoria's knees buckled. Jake stepped forward to steady her, but didn't. He simply stood there, a silent witness to the collapse of everything she thought was untouchable. The lobby had transformed. It was no longer a symbol of quiet luxury. It had become a courtroom, a place where silence held weight, and truth arrived without knocking. Damon stood in the center, not triumphant, not angry, but resolute. He raised his phone once more, placing a final call for the lobby speaker system. "Jennifer," he said clearly, "issue formal documentation. Victoria Sterling is terminated for cause, discrimination, misconduct, and harm to brand integrity." Her voice returned with crisp finality. "Confirmed. Sir, we've reviewed her employment history. 17 verified complaints, 6 settlements totaling $340,000, all previously suppressed. Every detail admissible." The number hit the room like a thunderclap. Victoria looked around wildly, searching for something to hold on to. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted. "I've done what every manager does." Damon didn't flinch. "Then consider tonight your industry's wake-up call, because what you did ends here." And with that, her illusion of invincibility finally shattered. Ryan Chun stepped forward again, his voice tentative. "Sir, the rest of us, we want to do better. We didn't know how deep it went." Damon turned toward him. Not cold, but firm. "You knew enough to feel it. You just didn't act. That changes now." Then his tone softened just slightly. "Accountability starts with acknowledgement. Training follows. But culture changes when silence is no longer safe." Ryan nodded, eyes brimming with something between guilt and resolve. Behind him, other staff members gathered quietly. They weren't protesting. They weren't hiding. For the first time, they looked ready to listen. Damon scanned a room, stopping on the young couple from earlier. The woman held up her phone. The video has over 80,000 views in 20 minutes. Damon let out a breath. Not relief, but momentum. "Good," he said. "Let the world watch this. Not because I was the target, but because thousands of people just like me were, every day without cameras." Victoria straightened suddenly, her voice laced with desperation. "You can't fire me over one misunderstanding. I'll sue for wrongful termination. This is retaliation." Damon didn't even blink. "You were accorded denying service to your new CEO after 17 prior complaints, with witnesses, documentation, and now, national exposure. Try finding a lawyer who'll touch that." Her mouth opened, but no words followed. Then Jennifer's voice crackled again from the speaker. "Sir, civil rights attorneys have already reached out. We're waiving all prior NDAs for discrimination victims. They're free to speak publicly if they choose." Gasps echoed around the room. The guests who had once applauded Victoria's actions were now glued to their seats, realizing they'd been part of something much uglier than an awkward moment. One man quietly deleted a video. Another slipped toward the exit, but there was no escaping the weight of what had been unleashed. This wasn't just a firing. It was a reckoning. Damon turned toward the larger crowd now, his voice calm but weighted with finality. "Everyone here tonight saw how power behaves when it thinks it's protected. Some of you clapped, some filmed, some looked away. All of those were choices." He let that truth linger before continuing. "This hotel will change. Not just policies, but culture. Silence will no longer be safe, and those who've suffered in the shadows will have a voice." The young woman from earlier stepped forward again, this time not with her phone, but with her presence. "I work in tech," she said, voice steady. "We've seen this too. Thank you for not letting it slide." Damon nodded, acknowledging the ripple beyond the room. This wasn't just about hospitality. It was about every boardroom, every restaurant, every lobby where assumptions shaped decisions. "Change," he said, "doesn't happen when we wait for systems to fix themselves. It happens when we force them to look in the mirror." Sarah's voice came through the phone now, steady, energized. "Sir, the board has voted unanimously. They're backing full termination procedures and all proposed reforms. Also, they've just approved a $2 million fund for victim compensation and mandatory diversity training across all properties." Murmurs broke out, not just from the staff, but from the guests. Real money, real change. Damon allowed himself a single nod. Not satisfaction, just movement. "Forward. Make it public," he said. "The guests here deserve to know what's changing. The employees too." Then he glanced at Victoria, still frozen, trembling beside the reception desk that had once been her throne. "Transparency is the new standard," he said. "We will no longer pretend discrimination is a fluke. It's designed, and from this moment on, it will be dismantled." The lobby, once cold and curated, now hummed with something unfamiliar. Accountability. And for those who had quietly endured for years, it felt like oxygen rushing into lungs long starved to breath. Security approached quietly now, not to protect, but to remove. Jake Morrison gave a small nod. Victoria, still shaking, looked around as if someone might stop it. No one moved. No one spoke. Not even the ones who had cheered her just 30 minutes before. Her walk toward the exit was slow, every step a surrender. The same revolving door she had used to push Damon out now turned for her, and every turn felt heavier than the last. Outside, reporters had gathered, lenses pointed, questions flying. Her name would trend, not for leadership, but as a lesson. Damon remained inside, standing where she once stood, but he didn't claim her seat. He didn't need to. His power wasn't in presence. It was in what he refused to ignore. He turned toward the staff, then the guests. Tonight wasn't about revenge, he said softly. It was about revealing what's been allowed for too long. And with that, silence returned, not heavy, but clean. 6 weeks later, Victoria Sterling sat in a stark, windowless room at the Regional Employment Tribunal Center. The table was too wide, the lighting too cold, and the silence too full of consequence. Across from her sat 2 tribunal officials, a court recorder, and a camera trained directly at her. Her lawyer, a man who once spoke confidently on cable news, now shuffled papers with visible discomfort. On the large screen behind them, Damon appeared via video conference, flanked by Jennifer Martinez and 2 pro bono civil rights attorneys. Calm, composed, and still unmistakably in control. Judge Rebecca Park presided, voice crisp and exact. We are here today to review the wrongful termination claim filed by Ms. Victoria Sterling against Washington Hospitality Group. The word wrongful hung in the air like irony. Victoria's lawyer tried to interrupt with an opening statement, but Judge Park raised a hand. Counselor, please wait. We will begin with the documented evidence, and there's plenty of it. Screens lit up around the room as evidence cycled forward. Security footage from the lobby, audio from the live speaker call, press headlines from that night, and most damning of all, the sealed settlement records now unsealed. 6 separate payouts to guests and staff of color, all pointing back to Victoria. Judge Park's tone never shifted, but her gaze was razor sharp. 17 formal complaints, 6 monetary settlements, and not a single disciplinary record until Mr. Washington's arrival. Miss Sterling, do you deny these patterns? Victoria shifted uncomfortably. I was following protocol. I maintained high standards. That's what management expected of me. Damon spoke next, calmly but with precision. Whose standards, Miss Sterling? Because mine include dignity, equity, and professionalism. Yours seem to include profiling and humiliation. Her lawyer whispered furiously, but Victoria sat frozen. Every document on the screen contradicted her story. Every frame of video proved she wasn't enforcing policy. She was weaponizing it. Then came the testimonies. One by one, former staff members appeared on screen. Housekeepers, receptionists, servers. People who had endured Victoria's reign behind a velvet curtain. Maria Santos, a former housekeeping supervisor, testified in tears. She called me help for 3 years. Wouldn't learn my name. When I reported it, HR told me I was being sensitive. They warned me not to stir trouble if I wanted to keep my job. The tribunal room remained still, but the weight in it thickened. Another former guest, a black military veteran, described being turned away from a prepaid suite because his appearance was unsettling to other patrons. He hadn't spoken publicly before. Now, unshackled by the NDA, his voice trembled but held firm. She didn't see a man who served his country. She saw someone to keep out of sight. Each voice was a blade, not out of vengeance, but out of long-silenced truth. And now, it was finally being heard. Victoria sat motionless, her spine stiff but her eyes hollow. Her attorney made one last attempt to salvage ground. Your Honor, my client has served in hospitality for over 15 years. What occurred that night was a misjudgment, not malice. She should not be professionally destroyed for a single lapse under pressure. Judge Park didn't even blink. Counselor, are you suggesting the 17 prior complaints and 6 settlements were also lapses? He faltered. No further argument. The judge turned to Victoria, gaze sharpened to a point. Miss Sterling, do you understand the impact her actions had on every guest, every employee who sat before us today? Victoria's reply was as empty as her defense. I was trained to maintain the brand standards. I didn't think it would ever go this far. That answer was all the tribunal needed. She hadn't learned. She hadn't grown. She still saw herself as the victim of exposure, not the architect of exclusion. Judge Park delivered the verdict without ceremony, but with unmistakable clarity. The tribunal finds Ms. Sterling's termination not only justified, but necessary. Her appeal is denied. She's also personally liable for $50,000 in tribunal costs due to the weight of documented misconduct. Victoria inhaled sharply, but no protest followed. Even her lawyer had stopped trying. The screen faded to black, and Damon's image reappeared. Still calm, still composed. This hearing was never about revenge, he said softly. It was about responsibility, about holding individuals accountable even when they hide behind company culture. Jennifer added, Miss Sterling has been permanently blacklisted from all Washington properties. And per board agreement, we've shared her employment record with every major partner in the industry. It was official. Victoria's career in luxury hospitality was over. Not suspended, not bruised. Ended, not because of one night, but because that night proved who she had always been, when no one thought consequences would ever follow. Outside the tribunal center, cameras waited, not for Damon, but for Victoria. Her lawyer walked ahead, refusing to speak. She followed behind, shoulders tight, sunglasses trembling over tired eyes. Reporters shouted questions she could no longer deflect. One even asked if she still believed she did nothing wrong. She said nothing. She couldn't. The viral footage had done more than expose her actions. It had defined her legacy. That night in a hotel lobby wasn't a fluke. It had become a lesson, a warning, a shift. And now, her name was permanently attached to that shift. In boardrooms, her case became mandatory training. In HR policy, a precedent. In business schools, a case study. And in lobbies across the country, whispers of "Don't pull a Sterling" signaled the end of looking the other way. The final headline flashed before fading to black. Justice delivered. Culture changed. One woman's fall had sparked an industry's reckoning, and no one, least of all Victoria, would ever forget it. 6 weeks later, Victoria Sterling sat in a stark, windowless room at the Regional Employment Tribunal Center. The table was too wide, the lighting too cold, and the silence too full of consequence. Across from her sat two tribunal officials, a court recorder and a camera trained directly at her. Her lawyer, a man who once spoke confidently on cable news, now shuffled papers with visible discomfort. On the large screen behind them, Damon appeared via video conference, flanked by Jennifer Martinez and two pro bono civil rights attorneys. Calm, composed, and still unmistakably in control. Judge Rebecca Park presided, voice crisp and exact. We are here today to review the wrongful termination claim filed by Ms. Victoria Sterling against Washington Hospitality Group. The word wrongful hung in the air like irony. Victoria's lawyer tried to interrupt with an opening statement, but Judge Park raised a hand. Counselor, please wait. We will begin with the documented evidence. And there's plenty of it. Screens lit up around the room as evidence cycled forward. Security footage from the lobby, audio from the live speaker call, press headlines from that night, and most damning of all, the sealed settlement records now unsealed. 6 separate payouts to guests and staff of color, all pointing back to Victoria. Judge Park's tone never shifted, but her gaze was razor sharp. 17 formal complaints, 6 monetary settlements, and not a single disciplinary record until Mr. Washington's arrival. Miss Sterling, do you deny these patterns? Victoria shifted uncomfortably. I was following protocol. I maintained high standards. That's what management expected of me. Damon spoke next, calmly but with precision. Whose standards, Miss Sterling? Because mine include dignity, equity, and professionalism. Yours seem to include profiling and humiliation. Her lawyer whispered furiously, but Victoria sat frozen. Every document on the screen contradicted her story. Every frame of video proved she wasn't enforcing policy. She was weaponizing it. Then came the testimonies. One by one, former staff members appeared on screen. Housekeepers, receptionists, servers, people who had endured Victoria's reign behind a velvet curtain. Maria Santos, a former housekeeping supervisor, testified in tears. She called me help for 3 years. Wouldn't learn my name. When I reported it, HR told me I was being sensitive. They warned me not to stir trouble if I wanted to keep my job. The tribunal room remained still, but the weight in it thickened. Another former guest, a black military veteran, described being turned away from a prepaid suite because his appearance was unsettling to other patrons. He hadn't spoken publicly before. Now, unshackled by the NDA, his voice trembled, but held firm. She didn't see a man who served his country. She saw someone to keep out of sight. Each voice was a blade, not out of vengeance, but out of long-silenced truth. And now, it was finally being heard. Victoria sat motionless, her spine stiff but her eyes hollow. Her attorney made one last attempt to salvage ground. "Your Honor, my client has served in hospitality for over 15 years. What occurred that night was a misjudgment, not malice. She should not be professionally destroyed for a single lapse under pressure." Judge Park didn't even blink. "Counselor, are you suggesting the 17 prior complaints and 6 settlements were also lapses?" He faltered. No further argument. The judge turned to Victoria, gaze sharpened to a point. "Ms. Sterling, do you understand the impact your actions had on every guest, every employee who sat before us today?" Victoria's reply was as empty as her defense. "I was trained to maintain the brand standards. I didn't think it would ever go this far." That answer was all the tribunal needed. She hadn't learned. She hadn't grown. She still saw herself as the victim of exposure, not the architect of exclusion. Judge Park delivered the verdict without ceremony, but with unmistakable clarity. The tribunal finds Ms. Sterling's termination not only justified, but necessary. Her appeal is denied. She's also personally liable for $50,000 in tribunal costs due to the weight of documented misconduct. Victoria inhaled sharply, but no protest followed. Even her lawyer had stopped trying. The screen faded to black, and Damon's image reappeared, still calm, still composed. "This hearing was never about revenge," he said softly. "It was about responsibility, about holding individuals accountable, even when they hide behind company culture." Jennifer added, "Ms. Sterling has been permanently blacklisted from all Washington properties. And per board agreement, we've shared her employment record with every major partner in the industry." It was official. Victoria's career in luxury hospitality was over. Not suspended, not bruised. Ended, not because of one night, but because that night proved who she had always been. When no one thought consequences would ever follow, outside the tribunal center, cameras waited. Not for Damon, but for Victoria. Her lawyer walked ahead, refusing to speak. She followed behind, shoulders tight, sunglasses trembling over tired eyes. Reporters shouted questions she could no longer deflect. One even asked if she still believed she did nothing wrong. She said nothing. She couldn't. The viral footage had done more than expose her actions. It had defined her legacy. That night in a hotel lobby wasn't a fluke. It had become a lesson, a warning, a shift. And now, her name was permanently attached to that shift. In boardrooms, her case became mandatory training. In HR policy, a precedent. In business schools, a case study. And in lobbies across the country, whispers of "don't pull a Sterling" signaled the end of looking the other way. The final headline flashed before fading to black. Justice delivered. Culture changed. One woman's fall had sparked an industry's reckoning, and no one, least of all Victoria, would ever forget it. In the former manager's office, now repurposed as a diversity training center, Damon stood quietly, reading letters framed on the wall. Not press clippings, not awards, letters from guests. A black veteran finally welcomed at a luxury resort. A young Latina entrepreneur who closed her first $1 million deal in the lounge. A refugee family who celebrated their naturalization ceremony in the ballroom. Each note handwritten, each signed with gratitude. Dignity had found a home here. The glass case on the far wall held the business card Victoria once mocked. Damon Washington, CEO, not as a trophy, as a reminder of how power could be blind. We're used to open eyes. The room wasn't cold anymore. Sunlight filled the windows. Plants thrived in the corners. The same space once used to judge and exclude was now a sanctuary of rebuilding. Damon didn't smile. He exhaled. It was working. Not everywhere yet, but here, the healing had roots. At the front desk, Damon paused. The faces behind the counter had changed. Devaticate, confident, smiling, but not performative. The check-in system now included a discreet escalation protocol if a guest flagged discriminatory behavior. Even subtly, the system logged it, triggered a review, and notified oversight teams within minutes. It wasn't surveillance, it was safety. Technology designed not to trap profits, but protect dignity. Every incident was followed up. Every guest received a human response. Damon knew no system was flawless, but this one responded, and that mattered more than pretending bias didn't exist. Sarah joined him with her tablet. 17 major hotel chains have adopted our audit protocols, she reported, and the Hospitality Equity Initiative has processed 2,400 verified complaints. 94% resolved. Guest retention is up. Employee turnover is down. Damon didn't celebrate. He nodded. Progress wasn't about noise. It was about proof. And proof was finally piling up. Louder than denial, stronger than pretense. The lobby buzzed with life. Families heading to dinner. Solo travelers with open laptops. Couples laughing over cocktails. But this time, no one looked over their shoulder. No one clutched their purse tighter when someone different walked by. Comfort wasn't reserved anymore. It was shared. Near the fountain, Damon spotted the young couple from that night. Now, with a stroller, their baby kicked happily, surrounded by grandparents, friends, and laughter. They were regulars now. Their wedding photo still hung in the hallway leading to the event suites. A legacy built not from apology, but from action. Damon approached, and a woman smiled. "He doesn't know what this place used to feel like," she said, nodding to her son, "and want to keep it that way." Damon crouched down, offering the baby his finger. "That's the goal," he said gently. "That one day he won't have to know what we survived to make this possible." Damon moved through the hall slowly, letting the details register. Not as a checking boxes, but as a man retracing a battlefield, now turned into sanctuary. The artwork had changed. The lighting was warmer. Even the uniforms, once stiff and formal, now reflected personality. Staff wore pins that celebrated languages spoken, hometowns, and personal stories. Every smile felt earned, not required. He passed by a guest relations kiosk where a manager helped a family with special accessibility needs. No ruse, no resistance, just patience and real service. It was everything Victoria had claimed to uphold, but never delivered. And the shift wasn't just visual, it was spiritual. The walls no longer held tension, they held trust. For Damon, that was the final metric. When a place no longer asked, "Do you belong?" because it already made room. This was no longer the Grandview Imperial of the past. It was the blueprint for the future. As Damon approached the executive suite, his phone buzzed softly. A message from Dr. Angela Washington, his longtime therapist, saw your CNN interview about expanding dignity audits to retail and healthcare. You've turned pain into infrastructure. I hope you're breathing. He smiled faintly, not because of the praise, but because someone had remembered the cost. It wasn't just the humiliation that night. It was the nights before it, and the nights after, the ones that didn't go viral, the ones he carried alone. Dr. Washington had once told him, "Power is not what you take back. It's what you rebuild so others don't have to." That wisdom had shaped every decision since. He typed back simply, "I'm still breathing. Thank you." Then he turned off the screen. This wasn't a moment for notifications. It was a moment to stand still, feel the quiet, and know that healing had replaced spectacle. Finally, as evening settled, Damon returned to the very spot where it had all begun. The center of the lobby, beneath the chandelier that once cast judgment like a spotlight. But tonight, the light felt different. Softer, warmer. A plaque had been installed nearby. Clean, brushed metal. No branding, no logo. Just a single inscription. In memory of dignity denied and justice delivered. Let this space forever remind us that silence is not safety. Guests paused to read it. Some took photos. Others simply placed a hand on the edge, as if grounding themselves in truth. Damon stood nearby, not to claim it, but to witness it. This wasn't about him anymore. It never really had been. It was about what could happen when one man refused to shrink, when a system built on exclusion was forced to face its own reflection, and when that reflection became the starting point, not for revenge, but for redesign. Facing the camera now, Damon stood exactly where Vittorio once stood. Same tile, same backdrop, but everything else had changed. 2 years ago, he said, this space witnessed 20 minutes of humiliation, but what followed was 2 years of transformation. Behind him, the lobby glowed, not with luxury, but with life. Families, travelers, staff, all reflected in the glass, all belonging. What started as one moment became a movement. But let's be clear, hospitality was just the beginning. Statistics flashed. 17 hotel chains were formed. 2,400 complaints processed. 12,000 diverse jobs created. Minority guest satisfaction up 89%. Damon looked into the lens. We're taking dignity audits to restaurants, retail, healthcare, banking, because discrimination doesn't stay in one industry, and neither will we. A final plaque shown behind him. Dignity denied anywhere diminishes dignity everywhere. Damon closed with what had become more than a mission. It was a principle. When you protect one person's dignity, you protect everyone's freedom. Fade to black.